It was surprisingly easy to get into the country, posing as a tourist with a small camera. But once here in Damascus, the difficulties began. If I booked into an hotel, I was told I would be followed. My contacts took me to an empty flat in a suburb of the city. To accommodate a journalist at home would put them in jail, they explained. I had to lock the doors and keep the blinds drawn. I have to sit here in hiding for hours at a time, waiting to get a message from one of the activists I'm working with here to tell me when it's safe enough to go into Damascus to meet with them. It is a frustrating way to report on the uprising here in Syria, but not as difficult as it is for those who are trying to bring about change in this country. I soon found I wasn't alone in my predicament. Nearly everyone I met was on the run and in hiding from Syria's ubiquitous mukhabarat, the secret police. Political activists are now scattered around the city in borrowed rooms and flats. I found Amer, a 26-year-old journalist, hiding in a friend's apartment. He had just written his will.
Prison was terrifying. They tortured me. They put me in solitary confinement. They beat me with electric batons. They spat at me and said my career was over.
His crime was to cast doubt on the president's promise of reform. What does Amer think real reform is?
The people of Syria dream of living in a country which is free, where there's the rule of law without a dictatorship, and where our lives are not ruled by the security forces.
Aliyah, the mother of a young daughter, had to go into hiding after leading a group of women demonstrators. Why did she do it?
I don't want my daughter to grow up like I did, having always to say something in one place and something else in another. I want her to be free. I want her to say what she wants, where she wants, when she wants. My daughter watches the TV and she hears us chanting, "Ash-Sha'b yurid isqat al-nizam." That means people want the downfall of the regime. And in her innocence, she repeated this in school, and the teacher got really angry and shouted at her and told her she had to praise the president.
Life in Syria is dominated by the weekly protests after Friday prayers. Who will go? Who will risk being killed by army snipers? Will they survive to return home afterwards? It's Thursday evening, the eve of what's become protest day here in Syria, and people are dashing home before the roadblocks are set up between the suburbs of Damascus and the city itself. The last thing that authorities want is for people to converge on the city, recreating the Damascus equivalent of Cairo's Tahrir Square. Even here in the prosperous middle-class suburbs, you can tell how many security guards patrol the streets by the number of times I am told to hide my camera. People here tell you that a mass demonstration in Damascus would not be like Egypt, it would be a massacre. But for opposition leader Riyad Saif, the weekly protests are the highlight of his week.
I am 65 years old now and I have a cancer, but I enjoy so much going to demonstrate every Friday with these youth. I see in them the future of Syria. And once I was caught and I was beaten very, very hard.
When Bashar al-Assad first came to power 10 years ago, he asked opposition leaders, like Saif, to help him introduce reform. When Saif suggested a genuine democracy, he was imprisoned.
Syria belongs to the Syrians. Syria is not belongs to the Assad family. And this, let's say, Assad family forever should have been stopped. It's enough.
While I was in Damascus, there were pro-regime demonstrations, and they're happening with increasing regularity, attended by thousands of ordinary people, and not just those from the ruling Alawite Shia minority. I went back to Amer's hideout, the journalist, and asked him who the president's supporters are.
بيكون في كل بلد في ناس مندفعين.
Like every country, there are people who benefit from the regime. There are 2 million security personnel in Syria. If they alone came out, that would be the biggest pro-regime rally ever.
Yesterday, President Assad repeated that his country was bedeviled by saboteurs. The regime alternate in accusing the protesters of being inspired by Israel, and at other times, they're accused of being part of an Islamic fundamentalist plot. Is there any truth in that?
When I went out to protest, I did not hear any purely Islamic chants. Everyone was chanting, Allah, Syria, freedom. That's what we want. Everyone was chanting for freedom. There are Syrians who are quite religious, but they do not impose religious beliefs on you.
So far, the biggest demonstrations have taken place outside the capital city, in cities like Homs and Hama, where thousands attended rallies despite the risks. Army brutality has been bravely documented by those wielding the weapon of this revolution, the mobile phone. The beatings and the killings have been indiscriminate, meted out to adults and children alike. The most painful image of which was the abduction, torture and murder of 13-year-old Hamza al-Khatib. Occasionally it has become too much for soldiers. Qutaiba could no longer take orders from his commanding officer and fled to neighboring Lebanon. All Syrians taking refuge here asked not to be identified. They hope to return one day.
They gave us the orders to fire heavily at unarmed people. We were surprised to be told to shoot randomly. No distinction between women, children, armed or unarmed men. Many were killed. All unarmed civilians. Our commanding officer said, "There's so much ammunition. Keep shooting. There's so much, no one's going to ask where it went." I would fire in the air or at empty buildings, because I knew if they found out I wasn't firing at people, they'd detain me in a secret location or they'd kill me.
The refugees in eastern Lebanon can see the Syrian troops across the border. It was the threat that these men now posed to the women of Syria which forced Khulud to leave the country.
I left my home in Talkalat to protect my honor. The men will defend the land, but I have to defend my honor. When we talk to our relatives in neighboring towns, they tell us horrifying stories. They told us that so many women were raped. Those who can't escape are trapped. The soldiers don't fear God.
In Syria, the violence continues. Latest pictures from the city of Homs show soldiers in an armored personnel carrier firing on apparently unarmed demonstrators. Activists say that there were 7 deaths in all. 3 months on and hundreds dead. Who's winning here?
The people are winning every day. Every day the regime loses another city.
We're paying a very high price, but we are winning.
My main wish to see Syria free before I die, and that's what I was struggling for years for that, and I'm sure it will not be so long that I'm very optimistic I will see it.
You don't see groups of people in Syria because if more than 10 or 12 gather, they're likely to be arrested. In August, it'll be Ramadan, when thousands will come together to attend daily prayer. This, people here tell you, is when the real revolution will begin.